Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Folks, we have a very important report for you today. The woke anti-Christian bigotry is on full display in Canada. The world is taking notice, as they should, and every single Canadian should be alarmed by the report that I am going to bring you today. So it all started when the CBC drummed up a fake news narrative about Sean Feucht, who is an American Christian rock singer. He's a worship leader, and he had a planned tour across Canada this summer. As he does every summer, he comes and plays to small Christian crowds, singing, worshiping, praying, doing what Christian rockers do. Nothing controversial about it, nothing outrageous, but the state media smeared him. They demonized his mainstream views and made it seem as though he was a villain, as though he was a radical, as though there was something terribly wrong with a Christian man coming to Canada to pray and to sing. Now, unfortunately for us in Canada, the CBC's propaganda was effective. Their campaign worked, and it caused woke local bureaucrats and elected officials across Eastern Canada to panic. And so those woke bureaucrats asserted their petty little power in trying to stop his concert. So you see, if you are a woke Laurentian in Eastern Canada, Central Canada, and even Western Canada, it is perfectly reasonable for you to use the force and the power of the government to stop someone else, to trample on their basic charter rights, things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of worship. All of those things don't matter if you are woke, if you use your woke authoritarianism to trample on other people's rights. And that's exactly what we saw. So I'm going to walk you through what happened. We reported this last week on the show. This is how it started. This was an article in CBC News last Tuesday, July 22nd. Residents want MAGA musicians concert at Parks Canada historic site canceled. So they labeled him a MAGA musician. Well, what makes Sean Feucht MAGA? I don't know. Maybe he voted Republican. Maybe he voted for President Trump. It's hard to say because they don't even have examples in the story of his apparently outrageous and controversial comments. They just tell you that he's MAGA. They tell you that he's extreme without providing those examples. So this article is just textbook CBC one-sided woke activism. That is what the state broadcaster does. So what do? They say that this individual is coming for a concert. He's MAGA. Why? Well, because he ran for the Republicans in an election 5 years ago, and therefore they've decided that he is MAGA. So what do? They interview 3 residents who apparently are very upset that he is coming and doing a concert in Nova Scotia. They found 3 residents with the exact same opinions, all drummed up with fear over the propaganda, the idea that somehow it's dangerous to have a Christian rock singer play in Canada. For goodness sakes, folks, Canada was, or it should be, it used to be a Christian country. Our country was founded on Christian values, Christian ideals, Judeo-Christian concepts of Western civilization. That is what our country is founded on. And now today in 2025, it is too controversial to hold those basic values that everybody in society held as recently as like my childhood and even my early adulthood. It used to just be mainstream and normal to hold Christian values. And now it's so controversial that you cannot even play a concert. So the CBC was successful. And because of their activism masquerading as journalism, it was this concert, Sean Feucht concert, was removed. And so this is what he wrote on X. This is my 3rd year in a row bringing the Let Us Worship to Canada. Never before has every major news outlet in the nation been talking about this. It's trending all over social media. We're provoking a nationwide debate about the right of Christians to freely worship their God. Just like the book of Acts, that what the activists tried to stop has now gone viral. It backfired. We are having to report on worship and preaching of the gospel every night. We do not seek this controversy, yet God use it for his holy. We will not be silent. That is what he wrote. And so even after they revoked the permit, stopped him from being able to perform at one location, one venue in Nova Scotia, he moved to the other, and then he carried on, right? This is a nationwide tour. As Juno News is reporting, this individual, Sean Feucht, had shows planned across all of Canada. So he's already had events canceled after the CBC report in Halifax, Charlottetown, Moncton, Gatineau, Quebec City, and Vaughan. So again, this shows you the smear campaign from the CBC and how successful it has been. But he carries on, and he held an event in Mel-Lastman Square in Toronto on Sunday night. But I want to take you to what happened in Montreal on Friday, because the bigotry in Montreal is out of control. It is out of this world. Unbelievable this is happening. So here the CBC is at it again. The CBC, Friday, July 22nd, MAGA affiliated musicians concert draws condemnation from the city of Montreal, but goes ahead as planned. So the CBC writes, performance at a Montreal church by Sean Feucht, a controversial Christian rock musician and rising star in the MAGA movement, went ahead as planned on Friday. Let me just pause it right there for a moment, folks, because the CBC has asserted that he's controversial. They've asserted that he's a rise in the MAGA movement. They don't have any evidence of this. From best I can tell, there's nothing controversial about him other than the fact that the CBC is making him a martyr. They're drawing all of this attention to him, and they're trying to make him out to be a villain. Like I said, there's nothing controversial about him. He holds pretty mainstream, regular, normal views in America, normal views in Canada, pretty mainstream. But the CBC has again decided that it's just all beyond the pale. And so what happens? Well, he goes to play at a church in Montreal, and it is just absolutely unbelievable. The police have decided that, well, the administration in Montreal, the city officials have decided that he doesn't have the right permit, okay? He's playing a concert at a church. Last I checked, you can go and you can sing at a church. Every Sunday when I go to church, we sing. The entire congregation sings. That's what people do at churches. You don't need some kind of a special concert permit to sing at a church. We still do have basic rights in Canada, and one of them would be to pray, the right to freedom of worship. But no matter, the city of Montreal decided to fine the church $2,500 for the crime of letting this singer, who the CBC has identified as being some kind of a threat, allowing him to play in their city. This is almost just, it's satire. This is satire. You have a Radio Canada journalist, a CBC reporter, who is asking the singer, Sean Feucht, why are you singing? You don't have a permit, right? So this is how it works in the CBC propaganda world, right? They get their talking points from the Liberal government. That first story that I showed you with the Halifax controversy, that was all drummed up by the Liberal MP. The local Liberal MP decided this person couldn't come. Here in Montreal, they've decided that they don't have the right permits for it. So they send the state broadcaster, the CBC, to push their line of questioning onto this singer. And watch this clip. It is pretty amusing.
The police have been amazing. These guys are so kind and so hospitable, and they've just been amazing to
What did they say
all
to
day
you?
long.
What did they say to
So
you?
we're really grateful. I mean, we're grateful that, you know, that they would show up, that they would warn us about how the anti-Christian bigotry is strong in this city. You know, I haven't done a lot of stuff in Montreal, but that's what they were warning me, that the attacks against Christians is a real thing. And I appreciate that, you know. I think that that's a really good thing to have police officers that are standing up for the freedom of worship. So I commend them.
But it's because you don't have the permit to have the concert.
I don't think you need a permit to worship in a church.
You don't have to, because it's religious freedom, Radio Canada. It's religious freedom. Do you know that?
Okay, so a couple of amazing things happened in that clip. First of all, Sean Feucht is saying that the Montreal police are actually very hospitable, very friendly, very polite to him. And notice the wording that he used, right? He said the anti-Christian bigotry is strong in the city. That is Montreal's reputation. That is the reputation in Canada. After all, Canada is a country where some 130 churches were vandalized and burnt to the ground after a fake news hoax about unmarked graves, and the country kind of shrugs its shoulders, right? When you start to have international observers and lawmakers and politicians in the United States ringing the alarm bell saying, hey, Canada has a problem. What we are watching is not supposed to be happening in the Western world. If this were happening in China or in Africa or in some other third world country, even Canadians would be ringing the alarm bell. Look at the bigotry, look at the hate, look at what is happening to a religious community in that part of the world, but it's happening in Canada, and so we're blind to it, right? Even if it were happening in Canada, by the way, to a Muslim community or a Sikh community or Hindu community or any other community, it would be front page news all over the country. But when it's happening to Christians, we almost don't even notice it. So important that he pointed out the term anti-Christian bigotry, because that's exactly what it is. And then you could see the woman reporter there. There's Alexa Lavoie from The Rebel, and next to her, the other lady reporter, I don't know her name, Radio-Canada, which is French CBC. So CBC reporter saying, but you don't have a permit. Where's your permit? And then you have this sort of loud journalist who's filming it. His name is Andre Pitre, mocking her and laughing at her, saying, you don't need a permit to be in a church in Canada. It's actually the other way around. It is a basic right for Canadians to be able to pray. And yet, that is not what happened, okay? So Sean Feucht continued with his concert in Montreal amidst huge protests. This is the power of the CBC, the power of propaganda. So you can see the crowd gathered outside the church with the Antifa flags. These look to me to be a bunch of Montreal, McGill University students, maybe. You can see the police presence. Of course, there's a Palestinian flag because they always have to bring the Palestinians into every single thing. And so the Antifa crowd came and they were protesting a church, protesting Christians praying in a church. And it didn't end there, because during his performance in Montreal, a protester actually entered the church and threw 2 smoke bombs onto the stage mid-performance. So this is what it looks like. He is praying. He is leading a church service, folks. He is a church worship leader. He is leading a church service in a church. I need to emphasize that because it is just so remarkable that this is happening, okay? Just stop for a second and imagine that a Muslim leader was leading prayer in a mosque and some right-wingers went in there and started throwing smoke bombs. I promise you, the Emergencies Act would be called. I promise you those protesters would be in prison right now. If it were happening to any other community, if it happened at a Jewish synagogue, it would be reported all over the world, right? But it happens at a Christian church, and you can see with grace, with calmness, Sean Feucht just takes a smoke bomb, hands it to the local church practitioner there, and he just calmly walks it out of the church and brings it back. That's the way to handle these extremists, just showing grace, showing calmness and courtesy. But I want to emphasize how incredibly dangerous this is. And in fact, how illegal it is, even in Canada, even with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which often isn't worth the paper that it's written on. We do have laws on the book that say that this is not allowed. So let me just read. This is an AI overview. It says, in Canada, interrupting or disturbing religious worship is addressed under the Criminal Code of Canada. Specifically, sections 176 and 175 deal with the obstruction of religious services and causing disruptions, respectively. So I'm going to read a little bit of the key provisions. Section 176(1). The section criminalizes the use of threats or force to obstruct or prevent a religious officiant from conducting a service or performing their functions. Section 176(2). This section prohibits willfully disturbing or interrupting any meeting of people assembled for religious worship or for moral, social, or benevolent purposes. Section 176(3). The section addresses the action that disrupt the order or solemnity of a religious service, a similar meeting, whether within the meeting itself or its immediate vicinity. And then section 434.1, this section addresses mischief, damaging or interfering with property motivated by hate, prejudice, or bias against a religion, and specifically mentions buildings, structures, or objects primarily used for religious worship. Folks, this is a crime. It is on the books in Canada. You can serve up to 2 years in prison for it. And yet, if you go back to those images of the church in Montreal, you will see police officers in uniform standing idly by while Antifa protests terrorize a church, while they obstruct a church service, while they disrupt it. They use objects to prevent religious officiant from conducting a service exactly as it's written in the criminal code. Was anybody arrested? Was anybody charged? The police just stood idly by, and instead they fined the church $2,500 for the crime of having a religious service. This is the state of affairs in Canada, and not to belabor this point too much, folks, but the reality in Canada in 2025 is that we see other faiths. We see faiths from people in other communities, not the founding communities of Canada, but other faiths, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Jews. All of these people have their religious rights guaranteed, and we see it time and time again. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. They can block the streets. They are allowed to have their prayer services. That is all common in Canada. We see it all the time. Large groups of almost entirely, I would say entirely men, able to take over the streets, city streets, blocking traffic, blocking people commuting, blocking Canadians just going about their daily lives. And that is perfectly okay. In fact, if you criticize it or if you try to stop it, you will be arrested. You will be stopped. You will be criticized. And this happens. But I guess they have the right permits. I guess it all comes down to permitting. And if you have the right permit, you can go ahead and you can pray. And that is a right that is sacrosanct in Canada. And yet, when it comes to Christians and a Christian rocker with mainstream views, apparently that is just beyond the pale in Canada. I want to talk a little bit about how this man is now being targeted by Canadian politicians. So as I said, he has a tour. He's coming up the rest of Canada, August. He's going to be in Winnipeg on the 20th, Saskatoon on the 21st, Edmonton on the 22nd, August 23rd, he's going to be in West Kelowna. August 24th, he's going to be in Abbotsford. All my friends in Western Canada, I encourage you to go to these events. Even if it's not your cup of tea, even if this is not something that you would normally go to, we have to show solidarity. We have to show the establishment, the Laurentians, the woke mind control leaders, the state broadcaster. Enough is enough, okay? Canadians don't want this. I hope this is a watershed moment. I hope this is a moment that causes us to stop and pause and reflect upon the insanity that is unfolding in our country by the woke authoritarian powers that be. I'm not sure if it will, but anyway, he does have these events coming up. And of course, what do we have? Politicians weighing in. So the Alberta NDP is urging the UCP government to not allow the pro-Trump Christian singer to perform at the legislature. All you have to do is call him a pro-Trump Christian or a rising star in the MAGA movement. And that is enough for the woke leaders to just say, oh, well, we can't have that. We can't have that. Okay, so the City News here is reporting the Alberta NDP is urging UCP to not allow a rising star in the MAGA political movement. You notice that they just repeat the same language, rinse and repeat. A rising star in the MAGA political movement. What does that mean? What does that mean? Okay, a rising star in the MAGA movement in the U.S. to perform on the grounds of the legislature in Edmonton next month. Sean Feucht, a Christian singer who is pro-Donald Trump, is scheduled to play at the Alberta legislature in August. So Alberta NDP MLA Janice Irwin wrote the following on social media. On Instagram, she writes, the UCP should not be platforming Sean Feucht at the Alberta legislature. Full stations have revoked permits for his events on public property. The UCP must do the same. Keep the pressure on, and let's send a clear message that there's no place for hate in our public spaces. So this is how the woke mob works, right? It's like all you have to do is point to other woke bureaucrats and say, well, those woke bureaucrats caved because this is a scary MAGA Republican, so we must do the same. And oh, the irony, right? They say that hate has no place in our public spaces. How would you describe the way that this individual is being treated, right? This is a Christian singer from the United States. Yes, he happens to have the crime of being an American, and even worse, the crime of being a Republican. But other than that, I mean, you saw the clip of him being interviewed. He's a very positive, jovial, nice-seeming man. He seems like a sweetheart who's just here because he believes in Christ and he wants to spread his message. That's it. And guess what? That's all protected speech on the Canadian Charter. And yet we have Canadian politicians, again, who don't want him to have, they don't want to share charter rights. They don't think that those rights should extend to people whom they disagree with. So here is Progressive Senator Dr. Christopher Wells. This is what he wrote on X. He says, no one is stopping Sean Feucht from hosting his shows in Canada. Well, that's actually not true. A lot of people are stopping him. Then he says, despite his criminal record, just a pause there. We looked into his criminal record. It has something to do with hunting in a non-qualified area, like illegal hunting or not hunting according to whatever the local code was. So at worst, Sean Feucht's biggest crime seems to be he's not very good at filling out paperwork, not very good at getting permits or adhering to the right permits. But again, throwing in the fact that he has a criminal record as if that has anything to do with what we're talking about. Continue from Senator Wells here. He says, He has no charter rights to have his shows hosted at public facilities, which must be safe and discrimination-free spaces that uphold community standards. Don't believe the martyrdom. Okay, so according to this progressive senator, first of all, if you have a criminal record, maybe you shouldn't be coming to Canada. Well, that might be something that we could agree on if it was a standard that was applied across the board to every single migrant and asylum seeker and refugee to say, hey, if you have a criminal record, you can't come to Canada. Well, if that was a standard that they kept for everything, I might agree with them, but it seems to only be applying in this one circumstance. Likewise, he says he has no charter rights to have his show hosted at public facilities. And so I guess he's saying that the charter doesn't apply to what, an American? So last I checked, the charter applies to absolutely everybody in Canada, and it especially applies to Canadians. So do Canadians have the right to attend his shows? Do they have the right to go and worship and pray? Because the senator is implying that they don't have that right, that that's not a charter. You might want to go back and read the charter rights. And then, of course, he says that we must keep our public facilities safe and discrimination-free spaces that uphold community standards. Okay, so you can't discriminate. You can't discriminate, but he wants to cancel this guy's concert because he disagrees with him over his religious beliefs, right? This is the upside down world in Canada, where war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. That's where we are in Canada. It's feeling a lot like 1984. And the irony is just totally lost on these people. And so again, because just to recap, the apparently controversial views that Sean Feucht holds are just his Christian values, right? The reason that they're not showing clips of his concert and saying like, this is what he's saying at his concert is because he's not saying anything controversial. He just believes in God. He believes in scripture. He's an evangelical Christian. Okay, so presumably his views are discriminatory against, they say, the LGBTQSTL whatever community, because he just believes in traditional Christian values, and somehow that's a threat. This is all because it's somehow a threat to supposedly the LGBTQ community. Constitutional lawyer weighs in. So we have Canadian Constitution Foundation's Christina Van Gyn writing on X. She says the Canadian Constitution guarantees the right of freedom of expression and freedom of religion. A concert inside a church is both. This applies to everyone in Canada and is not limited to citizens, in case you were confused by Senator Wells's post there, where he sort of implies that the charter only applies to Canadians. That's not even true, okay? The reason that we have a huge problem with illegal immigration and asylum seekers is because the way the judges have interpreted the charter is that it literally applies to absolutely everyone on Canadian soil. And so part of the reason why we have a hard time deporting people or stopping people from coming into Canada is because as soon as they step on Canadian soil, their charter rights guarantee that they have all kinds of access to endless judicial reviews and access to courts and access to government funds and all this kind of stuff, because the charter is interpreted that it applies to everyone on Canadian soil. So just absolute nonsense. Okay, and then just to bring it all the way around, this is like the cherry on top. The CBC is now admitting that because of their propaganda campaign, that Sean Feucht is the victim of censorship. So here's a story that they released yesterday: how U.S. Christian musician Sean Feucht put freedom of expression to the test in Canada. Subhead: by revoking concert permits, it looks like the government is engaged in censorship, according to experts. Notice how I say that it looks like the government is engaged in censorship. It looks like, because they don't want to admit that this is all part of a Orwellian censorship regime. They don't want to admit that they have authoritarian power with their woke mob and their state broadcaster. They don't want to admit that. So they just have to say, oh, it appears like he's being censored. People might be confused and they might think that this is censorship, even though, of course, it actually isn't, according to the CBC. So they interviewed some experts. They say, well, freedom of expression experts do not agree with Feucht's view in any way. They do see the effort to cancel his concert, especially those scheduled to be held in public spaces, as problematic and indicative of how censorship is being used as a means of tackling social media issues rather than debating them. So they have to make it clear that the good people that they interviewed don't agree with these awful, horrible Christian values, but that probably just like totally canceling his tour and revoking all his permits and creating all of these problems isn't the best way to talk about these issues. Of course not, because look at how popular this movement has become. Look at how viral these stories have become. I hope these concerts do better than ever. I hope that of Canadians go out to show their support of Sean Feucht, not necessarily because they agree with his music, not because they like it, but just to show the establishment, the Laurentians, that this is what happens, that there is, the Canadians have had enough of this. Canadians don't like this censorship, this woke authoritarianism. It has gone too far. Conservative MP Michael Barrett echoing this on X. He says, you don't have to agree with Sean Feucht to be concerned when the CBC and government censor worship or suppress dissenting beliefs. They violate the freedoms of religion and expression guaranteed in Section 2 of the Charter. That is deeply illiberal. That is absolutely right. This entire episode shows how deeply illiberal the establishment in Canada has become. The woke state broadcaster who is on a absolute mission to destroy anyone with dissenting views, the woke local bureaucrats who jump on board and get torn into a panic over the idea that, oh my goodness, someone who might be affiliated with MAGA or who might be a Republican, who might be an American, who might be pro-life, might be pro-Christian, might oppose the absolute excesses of the LGBTQ plus crowd. We can't have that in Canada. We can't have that in Canada. And so all of these people showing off how progressive they are, they actually assert so much power and control. And it looks very, very ugly, folks. And when international observers, when American politicians, and heck, even the White House, Sean Feucht has said that the American officials are observing what's happening in Canada. They're keeping an eye on it because they are concerned. That is good. Okay, I'm concerned. I hope you're concerned. We should all be concerned by this abuse of power, this social movement that has gone too far. It needs to stop. It needs to end. And if you're in Western Canada, I hope you will go to one of those concerts to show your support, to show that Canadians are not on board with this. We are going to fight against it. Again, I hope it's a watershed moment. I hope this helps flip the country back in the right direction. All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is Candice Malcolm Show. I'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you, and God bless.